The Vampire King's bride was late, and Vianne Zeller was about to lose her job because of it. She'd been hired 3 weeks ago as an event coordinator's assistant, a position she desperately needed after her apartment building had been condemned, and her savings depleted by emergency hotel stays. The Thornfield estate, a sprawling Gothic mansion on the outskirts of the city, had seemed like a dream opportunity when she'd applied. The pay was extraordinary, the work seemingly straightforward. Help coordinate what was being called the wedding of the century between two of the city's most powerful vampire families. Vianne had grown up knowing vampires existed. Everyone did. They'd revealed themselves to humanity 20 years ago, emerging from centuries of shadows with treaties and laws and careful PR campaigns. Most lived in their own districts, their own realms that existed in pocket dimensions accessible through certain doorways scattered throughout major cities. They had their own governments, their own kings and queens, their own ancient hierarchies that most humans didn't fully understand. What Vianne understood right now was that Lord Casimir Thornveil, the vampire king of the Northern Territories, was supposed to be getting married in 45 minutes, and his tie was crooked. She'd been sent to check on him. Her boss was handling a crisis with the flowers, and she'd found him standing alone in the cathedral's antechamber, looking out a stained glass window at the overcast sky beyond. The wedding was being held at dusk, late enough that the vampires could attend comfortably without the sun's weakening rays, early enough that the human guests wouldn't feel entirely out of their element. Casimir Thornveil was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Vianne had ever seen. His hair was pure white, falling past his shoulders in a straight silken cascade. His skin was alabaster, so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light. His features were sharp and regal, high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that could have been carved from marble. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been painted on, every line precise and perfect except for that tie which hung slightly askew. He turned as she entered, and his eyes, crimson red, ancient and knowing, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "My lord," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm sorry to intrude. I just wanted to check if you needed anything before the ceremony begins." He said nothing, just watched her with those unsettling eyes. Vampires could hear heartbeats, she knew. He could probably hear hers racing. Vianne swallowed hard and took a careful step forward. "Your tie is crooked," she said quietly. "Would you like me to fix it?" For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly he inclined his head in what might have been permission. She crossed the room on shaking legs, very aware that she was approaching a predator. Casimir Thornveil was over 3 centuries old, a warrior who'd fought in the vampire wars that had raged before the Great Revelation. He could kill her without effort, without thought. But his tie was crooked, and she'd been raised by a grandmother who believed that appearances mattered, especially at weddings. She reached up carefully, her fingers brushing against the silk of his tie. He was tall. She had to stand on her toes slightly, even in her heels. This close, she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way his skin seemed to have no pores, no flaws. He smelled like night air and something darker, something that made her think of ancient forests and older magic. "You're not afraid," he said suddenly, his voice low and rich with an accent she couldn't quite place. Vianne's fingers paused in their work. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But you're getting married in 40 minutes, and I won't let you walk down that aisle looking anything less than perfect." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or amusement. "Such dedication to your duties. I need this job." She finished adjusting the tie, smoothing it down against his chest. The fabric was cool beneath her fingers. There, perfect. She started to step back, but his hand came up, catching her wrist. Not hard, his grip was gentle but firm enough to stop her. His skin was cool against hers, and she could feel the unnatural strength in his fingers. "What is your name?" he asked. "Vianne Zeller, my lord, Vianne." He said it slowly, like he was tasting each syllable. "Why do you need this job so badly that you'd approach a vampire king with such little fear?" She met his eyes, refusing to look away even though every instinct screamed at her to submit, to lower her gaze. "Because I need to eat, because I need a place to live, because in 3 weeks I'll have enough saved for a security deposit on a new apartment, and I can stop sleeping in a hotel that charges by the hour." His thumb brushed against her pulse point, and she knew he could feel her heart hammering. "Your honesty is refreshing. Most humans simpering around me lately have been too busy trying to curry favor to speak plainly. I'm not important enough to curry favor with you, my lord." "No," he agreed, and something in his voice had changed. "You're not." He released her wrist, and she stepped back, rubbing at the spot where his fingers had been. Already she could see the faint marks his grip had left, not bruises, just the impression of his touch. "You should go," he said, turning back to the window. The ceremony will begin soon. Vianne nodded and fled, her heart still racing. She made it halfway down the corridor before she had to stop and lean against the wall, pressing her hand to her chest and trying to calm her breathing. That had been the stupidest, most reckless thing she'd ever done. Touching a vampire king without explicit permission, speaking to him like he was just another groom instead of an immortal predator who could snap her neck with one hand. But his tie had been crooked, and she'd fixed it, and now she needed to get back to work before her boss fired her. The wedding was spectacular in a cold, formal way. Vianne watched from the back of the cathedral as Casimir Thornveil walked down the aisle to meet his bride, Lady Seraphine Nightshade, a vampire noblewoman from the southern courts. She was breathtakingly beautiful, as all vampires seemed to be, with white hair piled high on her head and a dress that looked like it cost more than Vianne would make in a lifetime. They stood together at the altar, two perfect porcelain figures, while a vampire priest began the ceremony in a language Vianne didn't understand. The ancient rites her boss had told her, performed in Old Vampiric for political marriages between the great houses. Vianne should have been watching the ceremony. Instead, she found her gaze drawn to Casimir's profile, the sharp lines of his face, the way the candlelight played across his white hair. She thought about how his hand had felt on her wrist, cool and strong and careful despite the power she'd sensed in him. The priest spoke in the old language, his voice echoing through the cathedral. Lady Seraphine responded, her words crisp and formal. Then the priest turned to Casimir, asking what must have been the traditional question, the vampire equivalent of "Do you take this woman?" Casimir was silent. The pause stretched. Vianne saw heads beginning to turn, whispers starting to ripple through the assembled guests. The priest repeated the question, louder this time. Casimir Thornveil, vampire king of the Northern Territories, turned away from his bride and looked directly at Vianne, where she stood at the back of the cathedral. Their eyes met across the vast space, and she felt something electric pass between them, something she couldn't name. "No," Casimir said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. "I do not." The cathedral erupted into chaos. Vianne watched in shock as Lady Seraphine's face contorted with rage, as vampire nobles surged to their feet shouting in outrage, as human diplomats scrambled to understand what was happening. Her boss grabbed her arm, hissing, "What did you do? What did you say to him?" "Nothing," Vianne stammered. I fixed his tie," but her boss was already pulling her toward the exit, trying to get them out before the political catastrophe unfolding at the altar could somehow become their fault. Vianne looked back once and saw Casimir still watching her, his red eyes burning with an intensity that made her whole body shiver. Then she was outside, being shoved into her boss's car, listening to the woman rant about ruined reputations and broken contracts while Vianne's mind spun in dizzy circles. She'd straightened his tie, and the vampire king had called off his wedding. The next 3 days were a nightmare. Vianne was fired. Of course her boss blamed her for the catastrophe even though Vianne had no idea what she'd actually done wrong. The story hit every news outlet. Vampire king calls off wedding in unprecedented scandal. Analysts debated what it meant for vampire-human relations, for the alliance between the northern and southern courts, for the delicate political balance that kept the peace between the various vampire territories. No one seemed to know why Casimir had done it. He'd made no statement, offered no explanation. He'd simply walked out of the cathedral, leaving his bride and 500 scandalized guests behind. Vianne tried to lie low, but on the 4th day, there was a knock on her hotel room door. She opened it to find a vampire standing in the hallway. Not Casimir, this one was female, shorter with the same white hair and pale skin but eyes of ice blue instead of red. She wore modern clothes, jeans, and a leather jacket, and she looked annoyed. "Vianne Zeller?" the vampire asked. "Yes, I'm Isolde. I serve Lord Casimir. He requests your presence." Vianne's heart dropped into her stomach. "I don't think that's a good idea. It wasn't a request." Isolde's smile showed fang. "Well, it was phrased as one, but we both know what it really means. Come peacefully, or I carry you. Your choice." Vianne thought about running, but where would she go? If the vampire king wanted her, he'd find her. Better to face this now, try to explain that she hadn't meant to cause any problems, that she'd just been doing her job. She grabbed her jacket and followed Isolde out to a black car with tinted windows. They drove in silence through the city, past the familiar human districts and into the vampire quarter. The buildings here were older, more ornate, Gothic architecture mixed with modern steel and glass. They pulled up in front of a building that looked like a mansion from the outside, but Vianne knew must be one of the doorways to the vampire realm. Isolde led her inside and through an elaborate door marked with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when Vianne looked at them directly. The air shimmered, and then they were somewhere else entirely. The vampire realm was nothing like Vianne had imagined. She'd pictured darkness, caves, gothic horror. Instead, she found herself in what looked like a grand estate, with soaring ceilings and massive windows that looked out onto a perpetual twilight sky. Everything was beautiful and cold and precise, like stepping into a museum. Isolde brought her to a study lined with books, where Casimir sat behind a desk reading something that looked very old and very fragile. He looked up as they entered, and those red eyes fixed on Vianne with the same intensity she remembered from the cathedral. "Thank you, Isolde," he said. "Leave us." Isolde bowed and withdrew, closing the door behind her. Vianne stood in the middle of the study, feeling completely out of place in her jeans and worn jacket, and waited for the vampire king to speak. Casimir set aside the book and stood, moving around the desk with that inhuman grace all vampires possessed. "You've been avoiding me." "I didn't know you wanted to see me," Vianne said. "Your Majesty, my lord. I'm not sure what the proper form of address is. Casimir will suffice when we're alone." He moved closer, studying her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. "Do you know why I called off my wedding?" "No, my Lord Casimir. I assume it had nothing to do with me." "Then you assume incorrectly." He was standing right in front of her now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You straightened my tie. Such a small thing. A human gesture of care from someone who had no reason to care whether I looked perfect or not." Vianne's mouth was dry. "I was just doing my job." "No." His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek with impossible gentleness. "You were being kind. Do you know how long it's been since someone showed me simple kindness without wanting something in return? Without political maneuvering or social climbing or fear?" "I was afraid," Vianne whispered. "Yes, but you came anyway. You touched me anyway. You looked me in the eye and told me you needed your job to survive, and there was no artifice in it. Just honesty." His thumb traced along her jawline. "I was standing in that cathedral preparing to bind myself for eternity to a woman I respected but did not love, for politics and power and all the cold reasons vampires make alliances. And then I saw you at the back of the room, and I realized I didn't want cold anymore." Vianne's heart was hammering. "You can't call off a royal wedding because someone straightened your tie. I can do whatever I wish. I'm a king." But there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. "Though I admit the political fallout has been significant. The news said you might lose your alliance with the southern courts. Very likely." He didn't seem particularly concerned. "I've also received 7 formal challenges to duels, 3 assassination attempts, and more angry letters than I can count." "That's insane," Vianne said. "You need to fix this. Apologize to Lady Seraphine, explain it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake." His other hand came up, framing her face between his palms. "I won't lie to you, Vianne Zeller. I want you. From the moment you walked across that room without hesitation, treating me like a groom instead of a monster, I wanted you. I want to know everything about you. I want to hear you laugh. I want to see you in my world, in my life. I want." He stopped, something flickering across his face. "I'm being too direct. Humans court differently, I know." More slowly. "I'm frightening you." He was frightening her, but not in the way he thought. Vianne was terrified because part of her wanted to lean into his touch, wanted to believe that a vampire king could look at an ordinary human woman and see something worth burning down political alliances for. "This is crazy," she managed. "You don't even know me. Then let me know you." His voice was soft, almost pleading. "Stay here. In the vampire realm. Let me court you properly by human standards if that's what you prefer. Give me a chance to prove I'm not mad, that what I feel is real." "What you feel? You met me 4 days ago." "I've lived for 3 centuries, Casimir said. "I've had countless encounters with countless people. I know what matters and what doesn't. I know when something is worth fighting for." His thumb brushed her lower lip. "You matter, this matters, give me a chance to show you." Vianne knew she should say no. This was insane, impossible, dangerous. But she was living in a hotel that charged by the hour, she had no job, and she was looking at a future of scrambling for scraps in a city that didn't care if she lived or died. And more than that, there was something in Casimir's eyes that called to her, a loneliness that matched her own, a hunger for connection that went beyond blood and politics. "If I say yes," she said carefully, "what exactly am I agreeing to?" Relief flooded his features. "To stay here as my guest, to let me court you, to consider the possibility that we might have something real." He paused. "I won't lie, there will be danger. I have enemies who will see you as a weakness to exploit. But I will protect you with everything I have. You'll be safer here than anywhere in the human world." "That's not a high bar." "The human world hasn't been particularly safe for me lately." "Then let me offer you something better." He lowered his hands but didn't step back. "A place to stay, security, time to figure out what you want without worrying about money or survival. And if, at the end of it all, you decide you want nothing to do with me, I'll let you go with enough resources to start over wherever you choose. It was too good to be true. Vianne knew that. But she also knew that her options were limited, and at least this option came with the promise of safety and time. Okay, she said. I'll stay. I'll let you court me. But I'm not promising anything beyond that. The smile that crossed Casimir's face was radiant and terrible and beautiful. That's all I ask. He offered her his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Vianne took it. The vampire realm, Vianne quickly discovered, operated on different rules than the human world. Time felt strange here. The sky outside was always in twilight, never fully dark or light. Casimir explained that it was a pocket dimension, created centuries ago by powerful vampire mages to give their people a place to live without fear of the sun. He gave her a suite of rooms that were larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with a massive 4-poster bed and windows overlooking gardens where night-blooming flowers grew in impossible profusion. He assigned her servants humans, who'd chosen to live in the vampire realm, who seemed happy and well treated. He provided her with clothes, books, anything she asked for. And he courted her with a patience and intensity that left her breathless. Every evening she learned to think in evenings rather than days. Here he came to her rooms and asked if she'd like to spend time with him. Sometimes they walked through the gardens, and he told her about the flowers, about the history of his people. Sometimes they sat in his library, and she asked him questions about what it was like to live for centuries, to watch the world change around him. Sometimes they just talked about nothing and everything, and Vianne found herself laughing more than she had in years. Casimir was nothing like she'd expected. Yes, he was powerful and dangerous and utterly inhuman in some ways, but he was also funny in a dry, sardonic way. He was curious about her life, about human culture, about her opinions on everything from books to politics. He listened when she talked, really listened, like every word mattered. And he never pushed, never tried to take more than she was willing to give. When he touched her a hand at her elbow while they walked, fingers brushing hers as he handed her a book, it was always gentle, always careful. 2 weeks into her stay, Vianne woke to find Isolde standing at the foot of her bed looking grim. Get dressed, the vampire said. We need to move you to a more secure location. Vianne sat up, heart racing. Why? What happened? Someone tried to breach the wards around Casimir's estate last night. We caught them, but it's clear that his enemies are getting bolder. Isolde's expression softened slightly. He didn't want to frighten you, but I insisted you be told. You need to understand what you've gotten yourself into. Vianne dressed quickly and followed Isolde through corridors she'd never seen before, down into what looked like a bunker deep beneath the estate. Casimir was there, along with several other vampires she didn't recognize. They were all armed. Casimir's face went tight when he saw her. Isolde, I told you, she deserves to know the truth, Isolde said flatly. She's not a doll to be kept ignorant and safe. She's a human woman in the middle of vampire politics, and if she's going to survive, she needs to understand the danger. Casimir looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded. He crossed to Vianne and took her hands. Last night assassins from the southern courts attempted to enter my estate. They were after you. The world seemed to tilt. Me? Why? Because hurting you hurts me. His grip tightened. Lady Seraphine is displeased with how things ended. She wants revenge, and you're the most visible target. Then I'll leave. Vianne tried to pull her hands free, but he held firm. I'll go back to the human world. She'll have no reason to know. The word was hard, absolute. You're not leaving. I won't allow it. You can't keep me prisoner. I'm not. But his eyes were desperate. Please, Vianne, if you go back to the human world, you'll be even more vulnerable. Here I can protect you. Here you're surrounded by my people, my wards, my power. Out there you'd be alone. I've been alone my whole life, Vianne said, but her voice cracked on the words. Casimir pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head. Not anymore, he said fiercely. You're not alone anymore. I won't let anything happen to you. Vianne breathed in his scent, night air, and old magic, and felt something break open inside her. She was tired of being alone, tired of fighting, tired of pretending she didn't feel anything for this impossible man who'd upended his life for a chance to know her. I'm scared, she whispered against his chest. So am I. His hand stroked through her hair. I'm terrified of losing you, of failing to protect you, of discovering that what I feel is one-sided. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me you feel something. Vianne looked up at him, at this ancient, powerful, dangerous creature who was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, and knew she couldn't lie. I feel something, she admitted. I don't know what it is yet. It's too fast, too intense, too. He kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative. his cool lips pressing against hers with a gentleness that made her heart ache. Then she made a small sound in the back of her throat, and the kiss deepened. His hand tightened in her hair, his other arm banding around her waist, pulling her flush against him. She could feel the unnatural strength in his body, the predatory power, but he held her like she was made of glass. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, or at least she was. She wasn't sure vampires needed to breathe. Casimir rested his forehead against hers. "I will keep you safe," he said, "whatever it takes. Whoever I have to fight. You're mine now, Vianne Zeller, and I protect what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have bothered her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she'd felt in years. The next few weeks were a strange combination of romance and warfare. Casimir courted her with flowers and poetry and long conversations under the twilight sky. But he also trained her, teaching her how to recognize threats, how to defend herself with weapons made of silver and iron that could actually harm vampires. Isolde became an unexpected ally, drilling Vianne in self-defense techniques and explaining the complex politics of vampire society. "Casimir is powerful," the vampire woman said one evening after a particularly brutal training session. "But he's not invincible. The southern courts have allies, and Lady Seraphine's family is calling for blood vengeance. They claim Casimir's rejection broke sacred laws of honor." "Did it?" Vianne asked, wiping sweat from her face. "Technically, yes. But vampire law is complicated. There are precedents for calling off a political marriage if..." Isolde hesitated. "If what?" "If the vampire in question has found their heartmate." Vianne's stomach flipped. "What's a heartmate?" Isolde's expression was unreadable. "It's rare. Some vampires live for millennia and never find one. But when they do, it's absolute, inevitable. The vampire equivalent of soulmates, I suppose, though that's a crude human term." She paused. "Casimir hasn't said anything to you?" "No." Vianne's voice was faint. Is that what he thinks I am?" "I don't presume to know what Casimir thinks, but I know what I see when he looks at you. And I know that in 300 years, I've never seen him call off a political alliance for anyone." Isolde's ice-blue eyes fixed on Vianne. "If you're going to break his heart, do it now. Before this gets any messier." "I don't want to break his heart," Vianne said quietly. "But I don't know if I can be what he needs. I'm human. I'm going to age, die. He'll live forever. How does that even work?" "That," Isolde said, "is a conversation you need to have with him." That night, Vianne found Casimir in the library, reading by the light of dozens of candles. He looked up when she entered and his whole face softened. "Vianne, I didn't expect you this late. Are you well?" "I need to ask you something," she said, moving to sit across from him. "And I need you to be honest with me." His expression grew wary. "Always. Am I your heartmate?" The book in his hands fell closed. For a long moment he said nothing. Then yes. The simple honesty of it stole her breath. "How do you know?" "Because I've lived for 3 centuries and I've never felt anything like what I feel when I look at you. Because when you straightened my tie, something in me recognized something in you. Because the thought of existing without you is unbearable." He stood, crossing to kneel in front of her chair. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to frighten you. Humans have such different ideas about love, about time. I thought if I courted you properly, slowly, you might come to care for me without the weight of vampire mythology hanging over you." Vianne reached out, threading her fingers through his white hair. "I do care for you, more than I thought possible in such a short time. But Casimir, I'm human. I'm going to get old. I'm going to die. What happens then?" His hands gripped her knees. "There are ways, if you wanted, I could turn you. You'd become vampire, immortal. And if I don't want that?" Pain flashed across his face, but he said, "Then I'll love you for as long as I have you. 80 years, 60, 40, however many you have left. I'll take them. And when you're gone, I'll grieve for the rest of eternity, and it will still have been worth it." Tears pricked at Vianne's eyes. "That's the most romantic and depressing thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm a vampire, we're dramatic by nature." But his smile was fragile. "You don't have to decide now about turning, about any of it. Just stay. Let me love you. Let yourself love me if you can." "I think I already do," Vianne whispered. "Love you, I mean. It's terrifying." He surged up, capturing her lips in a kiss that was hungry and desperate, and full of all the emotion he'd been holding back. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his hair, her body arching against his. When they finally broke apart, his eyes had gone darker, redder, and she could see his fangs fully extended. "I want you," he said, his voice rough. "But I need you to be sure. Once we do this, once I truly claim you, every vampire will know you're mine. It will make you more of a target, not less." "I'm already a target," Vianne pointed out, "and I'm already yours. Have been since the moment you called off that wedding." The smile he gave her was all predator, and it should have frightened her. Instead, it made heat pool low in her belly. He stood, lifting her easily in his arms, and carried her to his chambers. What followed was a night of passion unlike anything Vianne had ever experienced. Casimir was patient and demanding by turns, learning every inch of her body, finding every place that made her gasp or moan. When he finally bit her fangs, sinking into the juncture of her neck and shoulder, while he moved inside her, the pleasure was so intense she thought she might shatter. Afterward, he held her against his chest, his fingers tracing the mark he'd left on her skin. "Everyone will see this," he said softly. "Every vampire will know you're claimed. Protected, mine good," Vianne murmured, already half asleep. "Let them see." She felt him press a kiss to her hair and drifted off to the sound of his unnecessary heartbeat, which he'd once told her vampires could control, slowing or stopping it at will. He always made his heart beat when he held her, she realized. A small gesture to make himself seem more human, more alive. For her sake, the attack came 3 days later. Vianne woke to the sound of alarms, harsh and discordant. Casimir was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with inhuman speed. "Stay here," he commanded. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Isolde or me." "What's happening?" "The southern courts. They're here." His eyes were hard, deadly. "They're making their move." He kissed her hard and fast, then was gone. Vianne locked the door as instructed, but she didn't cower in the bedroom. She grabbed the silver dagger Isolde had given her and moved to the window, trying to see what was happening outside. The grounds were chaos. Vampires fought in blurs of white hair and flashing weapons, moving too fast for her human eyes to properly track. She could see Casimir in the thick of it, his movements precise and lethal, cutting down enemies with a grace that was beautiful and terrible. Then she saw the other vampire, older, more powerful, with eyes that glowed gold instead of red. He was carving through Casimir's guards like they were nothing, heading straight for the main building. Heading for her, Vianne's breath caught. She needed to warn Casimir, but she had no way to reach him. No phone, no. The window exploded inward. The golden-eyed vampire landed in a crouch, glass shards falling around him like rain. He straightened, fixing those terrible eyes on her, and smiled. "The human pet," he said in a voice like gravel. "Lady Seraphine sends her regards." Vianne raised her dagger, knowing it was useless. This vampire was ancient, powerful. She was human, fragile. There was no way he moved, and she didn't have time to think. She just reacted the way Isolde had trained her, stepping aside at the last second and slashing upward with the silver blade. She felt it connect, felt the resistance as it cut through supernatural flesh. The vampire howled, stumbling back, golden blood dripping from the wound across his chest. He looked at her with something like respect. "You've got spirit, little human. Pity you won't live to." Casimir hit him like a freight train. The two vampires went down in a tangle of limbs and violence. Vianne pressed herself against the wall, watching in horror as they fought. They were evenly matched, both ancient, both powerful. But Casimir was fighting with a desperation the other vampire couldn't match, every movement driven by the need to protect. Finally, with a move so fast Vianne almost missed it, Casimir got behind the golden-eyed vampire and tore his head from his shoulders. The body fell, dissolving into ash within seconds. Casimir stood in the ruins of his bedroom, covered in gold and crimson blood, his chest heaving. Then his eyes found Vianne, and he crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. "You're hurt," he said, his hands running over her frantically. "The glass, I'm fine," she managed. "Casimir, I'm fine. You're the one covered in blood, not mine." He pulled back, and there was something fierce and proud in his expression. "You wounded him. You, a human, wounded a vampire elder. Isolde told me you were learning, but I didn't realize how well." "I was terrified," Vianne admitted. "You were magnificent." He kissed her, hard and possessive, then pulled back with clear reluctance. "I need to finish this. Stay with Isolde. She's outside. Don't leave her side." He was gone before she could respond. Isolde appeared moments later, looking grim. "Come on, we're moving to the safe room until this is over." The safe room turned out to be a reinforced chamber deep underground, warded with so many protective spells that Vianne could feel them humming in the air. Isolde stationed herself at the door, armed with enough weapons to supply a small army, and they waited. It felt like hours. Finally, Casimir appeared, still covered in blood but moving without any sign of injury. His eyes found Vianne immediately, and some of the tension drained from his shoulders. "It's over," he said. "The Southern Court's forces have retreated. We've won. For now," Isolde said darkly. "They'll regroup, come back stronger." "No." Casimir's voice was hard. "They won't, because I'm going to end this once and for all." He looked at Vianne. "I need to return to the human world. There's going to be a gathering of the vampire courts, all of them. Not just north and south. I need to make my case before the Council of Elders, explain why I called off the wedding, Why you're worth the political chaos it's caused. Vianne's stomach dropped. They'll never accept a human as a valid reason. They will when I invoke the heartmate clause. Isolde drew in a sharp breath. Casimir, that's a myth. No one successfully invoked it in over 1,000 years because it requires proof. But I have proof. He held out his hand to Vianne. The heartmate bond is visible to vampire elders. They'll be able to see it, the connection between us. They won't be able to deny it, and if they do anyway, Vianne asked. His expression went cold. Then I'll fight, for you, for us, for the right to choose my own fate instead of having it dictated by politics. He stepped closer. But I need to know, will you stand with me, in front of the council, in front of all the vampire courts? Will you let them examine the bond between us? Knowing that if they accept it, your life will never be the same. Vianne thought about her old life, the tiny apartment, the endless scramble for money, the loneliness that had been her constant companion. She thought about what she'd found here: danger, yes, but also passion and protection, and a love so intense it had rewritten the rules of vampire politics. She took his hand. I'll stand with you. The gathering of the vampire courts was held in a massive cathedral in the human world, one of the neutral sites where vampires and humans could meet on equal ground. Vianne wore a dress Casimir had given her, black silk that hugged her curves and made her feel powerful despite her very human fragility. The bite mark on her neck was clearly visible, and she wore it like a badge of honor. The cathedral was full of vampires when they arrived. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all with that same inhuman beauty, white hair and pale skin and eyes in every color imaginable. They all turned to watch as Casimir entered with Vianne on his arm, and the weight of their stares was crushing. At the front of the cathedral sat the Council of Elders, 13 vampires so ancient they made Casimir look young. Their leader, a vampire woman with eyes like silver coins, stood as they approached. Lord Casimir Thornveil, she said, her voice echoing through the space. You stand accused of breaking sacred law, of dishonoring your betrothed and throwing the vampire courts into chaos. What say you? Casimir's hand tightened on Vianne's. I say that I acted within my rights under the heartmate clause of the ancient accords. A ripple of shock ran through the assembled vampires. The silver-eyed elder leaned forward. The heartmate clause has not been invoked in over a millennium. You would claim this human as your heartmate. I would. I do. Casimir's voice was steady, absolute. And I submit myself and my heartmate to your examination to prove the truth of my claim. The elder studied them both for a long moment. Then she nodded. Very well, approach. Casimir led Vianne forward, and the 13 elders descended from their seats to surround them. Their power was immense, pressing against Vianne from all sides until she could barely breathe. Casimir's arm went around her waist, holding her steady. Look at me, he murmured. Ignore them, just look at me. Vianne focused on his face, on his red eyes, on the love and fear and hope she could see there. The elders began to chant in Old Vampiric, their voices weaving together into something that felt alive, something that reached inside her and pulled. She felt it then, the bond Casimir had spoken of. It appeared in her mind's eye like a thread of light, stretching between her heart and his, pulsing with every beat. It was golden and beautiful and so strong she didn't understand how she'd never noticed it before. The chanting stopped. The elders stepped back. The silver-eyed leader looked shaken. It's true, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. The bond is genuine. Absolute. This human is Lord Casimir's heartmate. The crowd erupted into chaos, some cheering, some shouting in outrage. The elder raised her hand and silence fell instantly. The heartmate clause is clear, she continued. No vampire can be compelled to honor a political marriage if they have found their true heartmate. Lord Casimir acted within his rights. The betrothal to Lady Seraphine Nightshade is null and void. All grievances against him are dismissed. Lady Seraphine stood in the crowd, her beautiful face contorted with rage. This is an outrage. She's human. She'll die in a blink. And then what? He threw away centuries of alliance for a mayfly. Casimir turned to face her, his expression cold. I threw away a loveless eternity for a chance at something real, and if I only get 80 years with her, they'll still be worth more than 1,000 years of cold politics. He looked back at the council. I have one more request to make. I want the vampire courts to formally recognize Vianne Zeller as my consort, with all the protections and rights that entails. Any attack on her will be treated as an attack on me, on my territory, on my crown. The silver-eyed elder inclined her head. It is granted. Let it be known throughout all the vampire realms Vianne Zeller is the acknowledged consort of the vampire king of the Northern Territories. Any who harm her will face the full weight of vampire law. Vianne felt tears prick at her eyes. She'd gone from a woman alone, scrambling to survive, to this protected by vampire law, claimed by a king, Standing in front of the most powerful vampires in the world and being acknowledged as one of them, Casimir turned to her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "I love you," he said quietly, just for her. "Whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face, I love you." "I love you too," Vianne whispered back. He kissed her there in front of everyone, and the cathedral erupted into applause. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The vampire courts gradually accepted the situation, some grudgingly, some with genuine happiness for Casimir. Lady Seraphine and her family remained hostile, but the council's ruling meant they couldn't act openly against Vianne without facing severe consequences. Casimir brought Vianne back to his estate in the vampire realm, and they began to build a life together. It wasn't always easy. There were cultural differences to navigate, political pressures from vampires who disapproved of a human consort, and the constant awareness that their time together was limited by Vianne's mortality. One evening, about 2 months after the council's ruling, Vianne found Casimir in the library, looking at something that made him seem unbearably sad. "What is it?" she asked, moving to sit beside him. He showed her the book, a journal, she realized, written in an elegant hand. "This belonged to my mother. She was human like you. She married my father knowing she'd only have a few decades with him." Vianne's eyes widened. "I didn't know vampires could have human parents. It's rare. Most vampires are turned, not born. But occasionally a vampire and a human will have a child together. The child is always vampire." He touched the page gently. "My mother lived to be 70. My father loved her every day of those years, and then he grieved for centuries after she was gone. I watched him suffer that loss, and I swore I'd never put myself in that position. And yet here you are," Vianne said softly. "Here I am." He closed the journal and turned to face her fully. "I told you I'd accept whatever time I had with you. I meant it. But Vianne, my love, if you wanted to become vampire, to live with me not just for decades but for eternity, I would count myself the luckiest being in existence." Vianne had been thinking about this for weeks. She'd asked Isolde about the turning process, about what it meant to become vampire. It wasn't an easy choice. She'd have to give up the sun, would need to drink blood, would watch every human she'd ever known age and die while she remained unchanged. But she'd already lost so much in her life. Her parents were dead, her grandmother gone. She had no siblings, few friends. The life she'd had before Casimir had been one of loneliness and struggle. Now she had love, purpose, a place where she belonged. Why would she give that up after just a few decades when she could have it forever? "I want to," she said. "Turn me, make me vampire, make me yours for eternity, not just for a human lifetime." The hope that blazed in his eyes was almost painful to see. "You're certain?" "Vianne, this isn't something that can be undone." "I'm certain." She took his hands. "I love you. I love the life we're building. I don't want it to end in 50 years or 60 or 80. I want forever with you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Then you'll have it. Forever. I swear it." The turning happened that night. Casimir explained the process carefully. He'd drink from her until she was on the edge of death, then give her his blood to drink. She'd die as a human and wake as a vampire, transformed into something new. "Hurt. The transition is painful, but I'll be with you the entire time. I trust you," Vianne said. And she meant it. She lay down on his bed and he positioned himself above her, his face solemn. "Last chance to change your mind." "I'm not changing my mind. Do it." He bent to her neck and she felt his fangs pierce her skin. The pleasure was there, like always, but this time he didn't stop. He drank deep and she felt herself getting weaker, her heartbeat slowing. The world started to fade, going gray at the edges. Just when she thought she might disappear entirely, he pulled back. His wrist was already cut, blood darker than human blood, more viscous welling from the wound. He pressed it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded. She did, and the taste was strange, metallic but also sweet, almost intoxicating. She drank until he pulled away, and then the pain began. It felt like fire in her veins, like her body was tearing itself apart and rebuilding from the inside out. She screamed, and Casimir held her through it, whispering words of comfort that she couldn't quite hear over the roaring in her ears. Time lost meaning. The pain went on until she thought she couldn't survive it. Then finally it began to fade. Vianne opened her eyes and saw the world in a completely new way. Everything was sharper, clearer. She could hear things she'd never noticed before: the sound of Casimir's controlled heartbeat, the rustle of fabric, voices from rooms away. She could smell everything, complex layers of scent that overwhelmed her senses, and she felt strong, powerful, like she could tear through walls if she wanted to. "Vianne?" Casimir's voice was cautious. "How do you feel?" She sat up easily, movements that would have required effort before now feeling effortless. She looked down at her hands and saw that her skin had gone pale. Not quite as white as Casimir's, but no longer the warm brown it had been. She touched her hair and found it had lightened to a silvery white blonde. I feel. She paused, searching for words. Everything. I feel everything. He smiled, and she saw the relief in his expression. The transition worked. You're vampire now, fully and completely. Vianne looked at him and realized she could see it, the bond between them, that golden thread, but now it was even stronger, pulsing with shared immortal life. We're the same now, she said in wonder. Equal, we were always equal, Casimir corrected gently. But yes, now we're the same species. We'll have eternity together. She launched herself at him, kissing him with all the supernatural strength she now possessed. He caught her easily, kissing her back just as fiercely, and they tumbled onto the bed together. I love you, Vianne said between kisses. For now and forever and always. Forever and always, Casimir echoed. My heartmate, my love, my queen. 6 months later they held a wedding in the cathedral where Casimir had called off his previous one. This time, when the priest asked if he would take Vianne Zeller as his eternal consort, Casimir's answer was immediate and absolute. I will, now and forever. Vianne said the same, and when they kissed, the assembled vampires cheered. The reception was held in the vampire realm, a grand celebration that lasted for 3 days. Vampires from all the courts attended, even some from the southern courts who'd initially opposed the match. Lady Seraphine sent a gift, a grudging acknowledgement of their union, if not quite an apology. On the final night, as the celebration wound down, Casimir led Vianne out into the gardens where night-blooming flowers grew in wild profusion. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, not a wedding ring. They'd already exchanged those, but something else. A signet ring bearing the crest of the Northern Territories. This makes you not just my consort, but my co-ruler, Casimir explained. My equal in every way. What's mine is yours. My power, my territory, my crown. I want to rule beside you, not over you. Vianne felt tears prick at her eyes. Vampire tears, she'd learned, were tinged with red. You'd share your crown with me.
I'd give you the whole world if you asked for it.
He slipped the ring onto her finger. All I want in return is your love forever. You already have that. She pulled him down for a kiss, and in the distance she could hear music still playing, vampires still celebrating. They'd come so far from that moment in the cathedral when she'd straightened his crooked tie. She'd been alone then, struggling to survive, with no idea that one small gesture would change everything. Now she had eternity stretching out before her, filled with love and passion and purpose. She had a partner who saw her as an equal, a home where she belonged, and a future that held infinite possibilities. Casimir pulled back from the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. No regrets? Not a single one, Vianne said truthfully. This is everything I never knew I wanted. Good. His hand came up to cup her face. Because I'm never letting you go. I'm counting on it. They stayed in the garden until dawn approached, forcing them inside. But as they walked hand in hand back to the estate, Vianne thought about the future that awaited them. There would be challenges. Certainly ruling the Northern Territories would bring its own complications. And vampire politics were never simple. But they'd face it all together, equal partners in love and in power. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. Vianne proved to be a natural leader, earning the respect of the vampire courts through her wisdom and strength. She and Casimir ruled the Northern Territories together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. They had their share of troubles, political disputes, territorial conflicts, the occasional assassination attempt from vampires who still resented a former human sitting on a throne. But they faced everything together, and their love never wavered. On their 300th anniversary, Casimir took Vianne back to the human world, to the cathedral where they'd first been acknowledged as heartmates. It looked different now. The building had been renovated several times over the centuries, but the bones of it were the same. Do you remember? He asked, standing in the spot where they'd stood before the Council of Elders. Every moment, Vianne said. I remember being terrified. I remember thinking there was no way they'd accept a human as your heartmate. I knew they would. Casimir's arms came around her from behind. I could see the bond between us so clearly. I knew they'd have no choice but to acknowledge it. You took such a risk calling off your wedding, going against all of vampire politics, fighting for me. Not a risk, a certainty. He turned her to face him. You were worth every bit of chaos, every political complication, every challenge. You still are. Vianne reached up to straighten his tie, a habit she'd never quite broken, even though he no longer needed her help to dress. Your tie was crooked that day too, you know. Before the wedding you called off. I know. I did it on purpose. She pulled back in surprise. What? His smile was mischievous. I saw you across the room in your event coordinator uniform, looking efficient and beautiful and completely unimpressed by all the vampire grandeur. I thought if I made myself look slightly imperfect, you might approach me, might give me an excuse to talk to you. You manipulative." But she was laughing. "You let me think I was being helpful when really you were orchestrating the whole thing. Only the first part. Everything after the connection felt, the decision to call off the wedding, the fight for our future that was all real, as real as anything I've ever known." He grew serious. "I saw you, Vianne, and I knew you were the one I'd been waiting centuries to find. 300 years later, and you still know how to make me feel like the most important person in existence. That's because you are." He kissed her there in the cathedral where their public life together had begun. "My heartmate, my queen, my forever, forever." Vianne agreed, kissing him back. They left the cathedral hand in hand, stepping out into a world that had changed dramatically since Vianne had first straightened Casimir's tie. But some things remained constant: their love, their bond, their commitment to each other. As they walked through the city back toward the doorway to the vampire realm, Vianne reflected on the strange path her life had taken. She'd started as a struggling human, alone and barely surviving. A simple act of kindness straightening a crooked tie had led to a love that transcended species, politics, and time itself. She'd become vampire, become a queen, become someone she never could have imagined in those desperate days before she met Casimir. And she'd do it all again in a heartbeat, because some connections were worth fighting for. Some loves were worth upending the world for. And some ties, once straightened, bound two souls together for eternity. Casimir squeezed her hand as they approached the doorway to their realm, and Vianne squeezed back. They had forever ahead of them, and she intended to treasure every moment. The end.